The first session of the US webinar series for the 2024 and 2025 academic calendar has started, let's say. During this process, you are welcome to share the topics of interest and any requests as suggestions. We can host the webinars with our experts in the specific fields upon your request. Additionally, we encourage you to inform us of any. Moreover, our preparation for URI 2025, we have also started, and in this context, our conference coordinator, Miss Ayşe Deniz Özkan, she's here with us. She just will provide a brief update of the summit, some information about the summit, and later we can start our webinar. Dear Miss Ayşe.
Thank you, Sabina. Hello, everyone, dear URAS members. I wish everyone a great start, an inspiring, invigorating start to the new academic year. As Sabina mentioned, we are already working on the next Eurasia Higher Education Summit. The next edition, please mark your calendars, will be on April 8 to 10, 2025. The host city, again, is Istanbul. So we hope to see all the URAS members, our colleagues, partner institutions convening in Istanbul again to discuss the latest developments, critical issues, interesting trends in the international higher education sector. This will be your chance to participate in the conference program, also exhibit in the exhibition hall for greater visibility, networking, and partnership building. So a lot of the details are available already on our website, on the URI website. You can participate as an exhibitor, as a visitor, or as a speaker. As I mentioned, the conference program is in the process of being designed, and the call for proposals is open. So please check our website, and please do not hesitate to contact me or Sabina for any questions that you have. Please join us in preparing the 10th anniversary of the Eurasia Higher Education Summit in 2025. So with all that being reminded, Sabina, I give the floor back to you to introduce our distinguished panelists today. And I'm very much looking forward to this topic. And thank you again to all our speakers for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, dear Miss Ayşe. And now we can start our webinar for the new leadership for new era, how US K-12 public schools leaders and embracing the future. And today we will host Dr. Starr, Dr. Huizenga, I'm really sorry if I'm pronouncing wrong, and Dr. Thornell. So yeah, please. And today's moderator for our webinar is Dr. Josh Starr. Please, you can start.
Great. So hello, everybody. It is morning for us. I know it is afternoon for you. I'm Josh Starr. I am the managing partner of the Center for Model Schools. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background, and then I'm going to introduce Dr. Huizenga and Dr. Thornell. They're going to tell you a little bit about what they do, and then we're going to share some of the work that we do and some ideas about leadership these days for public schools. And if there's anything you want us to talk more about, please put it in the chat or put it in the Q&A. We'll certainly have time for questions as we go. So I started my career as a teacher in Brooklyn, New York, public school teacher. I then became a central office administrator in different school districts around New York City, including the New York City Public Schools, the largest school system in the country. I designed accountability systems, became a superintendent of schools in 2 different districts, very diverse school districts, one of which was the 15th biggest district in the country, and then led the turnaround of a nonprofit for a number of years that sat at the intersection of research, policy, and practice. And for the last 2 years, I've been running the Center for Model Schools, which is part of HMH, a large company. And we work with leaders around the world, mostly in the US, but we work with leaders around the world to help them improve teaching and learning. As Jessica always says, we help them get better at getting better. And we do that through our conference. We have the second biggest conference, education conference in the country. Join us this year in DC for Model Schools. And then we do it through shoulder-to-shoulder support, where we go into schools and we go into districts and we help principals, we help superintendents, we help assistant superintendents improve conditions for kids. So I'm really excited to sort of put some of our ideas out into the world, literally, today, and share them with you. But let me turn to Dr. Huizenga so she can quickly introduce herself. Then we'll go over to Rob, and then we'll start the conversation. So, Jessica.
All right, good morning, everybody. I'm Dr. Jessica Huizenga. I'm an associate partner with the Center for Model Schools. I've been with the center about 1.5 years now. Prior to coming aboard with Josh, I was in the public school arena for about 24 years. I started as a teacher, a secondary high school and middle school history teacher, and then became an assistant principal, a principal, was an assistant superintendent, a superintendent of schools, and I was also the first female state appointed receiver in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And what that means is that you're kind of given full authority of both the school board and the superintendency to turn around a district. So just like Josh, I have a lot of experience with turnaround and improving academic outcomes for students. And now I work all over the country, and I'm starting to work internationally, really helping schools and systems build their leadership bench, helping state agencies really kind of relook and redefine leadership so that we can create the conditions for teachers and students to be really successful, and really ensure that all students can attend model schools. And so I'm really excited to be here with all of you, and I'll turn it over to Rob.
Well, I'm very honored to be here and be part of this group today, and look forward to sharing with you. I did pretty much the traditional path here in the United States. I was a teacher for a little while, assistant principal at both an elementary and a secondary school, pretty large suburban district. Then moved into assistant superintendency of curriculum instruction, professional learning, which is kind of a passion of mine, and then finally a deputy superintendent. Very fast, large growing district. And so one of the things that I did, in fact, my dissertation work is on mentoring first year principals, and building leadership capacity is kind of a passion and things that I did. I hired a lot of principals in my time. And so now I've been working with the center for a couple of years, and I spend a lot of my time with both at the cabinet level and with campus principals, building level, again, building their capacity, in a variety of leadership ways as the job has gotten more difficult, and what we're going to talk about today. But that's where I spend a lot of my time. I work in some very diverse districts and turnaround districts, and then I also work in some very affluent districts that have different types of challenges. And so that's kind of been my career path.
All right. So let me also say to us, we're Americans. We may use terms that are unfamiliar to you. Please put in the chat or the Q&A if we say something and you don't know if it's just an unfamiliar term. Please, make sure you raise your hand so we can clarify if there's some, something we're saying that that isn't familiar. So I'll open this up, Jessica and Rob, to either one of you. One of the things we talk about, and what we focus on when we work with leaders is this idea of a model school, right? What is, when we think about a model school and the idea that every child deserves to be in one, to talk a little bit about what that school looks like what happens in a model school, what are kids doing, what are teachers doing? Just describe a little bit what a model school is. Either one, you guys can fight it out. So
sure.
I
mean, a couple of things come to my mind. First of all, it's not a cookie cutter, right? There's no exact science to what a model school is. But some of the things that I think about, Josh, on that is there's got to be a high level of trust. And when we say that, it's principal and teacher trust both ways, but it's teacher to teacher trust. Can they collaborate together? And finally, it's also student to teacher trust. How do those kids feel about school? Do they feel like they've been served well and personalized learning and all the things that go with that? Do they trust their teachers to do that? And I think a big piece that sets a model school apart from others is collaboration with teachers among teachers. And so that teacher to teacher trust, and I say all the time, not just friend trust, but professional collegial trust. I trust you to give me feedback about my craft and my practice, and that I trust you enough that it's okay for me to give you feedback. And that, to me, that really separates a model school from other schools, because a lot of times I'll go into a school and they'll say, hey, we got a great culture. And what they mean by that is that we just all like each other. And it's a little deeper than that, right? You really have to push each other and challenge each other in their practices. And so that's something we work on a lot.
When I
Yeah.
was superintendent of schools in Stanford, I'm going to turn to you, Jessica. It's a very quick story. There was a school, it was the nicest school. Everyone was so nice. The instruction was terrible. The scores were terrible, but everybody was so nice and happy. And some of the teachers said, you know, we're all happy and nice, but we need to get much better at teaching and learning. So yeah. So that's great, Rob. I appreciate that. Jessica, talk a little bit about what's a model school? Like, what are kids doing? What are adults doing? What does it look like in a model school?
Well, I mean, I think, we have to keep the main thing, right? A model school is going to ensure that all kids come out really academically prepared. I think that that's really important. You just talked about having, rigorous, high quality instruction. I think that, we have to keep that at the forefront, but also it's important because when we think about the purpose of schooling, I want good people to leave our schools. I want, kids to have good social and emotional skills. I want them to be self-aware. I want them to be able to have the passion to go out in the world and make a difference. And they're only going to feel that way if they experience joy in learning. So I think when we walk through schools that are model schools, we're going to see kids who are really enjoying the learning process. And I think, like Rob said, because there's strong connections and relationships there, students are experiencing mastery. Students have choice in their learning. All of those things make for model schools. And then when it comes to staff are really working in conditions that are created by leaders that really equip them, right, to show up each day their best self. I mean, think about a staff coming into work every day, showing up as their best selves for each other, for students. And really, they have the desire to continuously learn. Leaders have the desire to continuously learn. And they really create those conditions for kids to really want and have that desire to continuously learn. There's just a climate of curiosity and inquiry from the adult level down to the student level. Those are all things that I really think make up a model school.
So we're going to
Can
get.
I just throw in there?
Yeah, please, Rob.
You will
Yeah.
not have a model school without a model principal. And I
That's
believe
right.
that strongly. The leadership, and sets the tone for the instruction. It sets the tone for the culture and the climate. And so I say that all the time. And the other part, like Jessica said, a laser-like focus on what our mission is.
Yeah, you can't have a
there's
great
no
school
doubt.
without a great principal. So we're going to get to this notion of, because you're talking about two different things here. One is you're sort of talking about the conditions for success that a leader has to create, and we're going to talk about in a couple minutes the explicit actions and strategies that leaders use for that. But you're also talking about what happens with kids, what they experience, and what they achieve. But I've been at this for 30 years now, right? I mean, I started teaching in 1993, a long time ago. And I feel, and I don't, and you both have been around for a while too. I feel like what you're just both describing though is not the way it's always been. I feel like there used to be, I mean, were the things that you were doing early in your career as educators and as leaders the same as what you're doing now, or has it changed? Jessica, start with that. Like, what has it always been? What you just described, the joy, the focus on social emotional skills, like, has it always been that way, or how have things changed over the last 20, 30 years in the U.S.?
So I think the biggest change that I've seen, so when I was a kid and I was in school, the teacher in the classroom was the holder of knowledge. And that's just not our day and age now, right? Kids can get so much more information off of TikTok, off of YouTube, off of the internet. And the role of the teacher really needs to, kind of change along with the conditions of, this day and age. So that's kind of the biggest thing is our world is just a very dynamic and different place now. So I think those things have to be taken into account. Like if we're going to have truly engaging instruction, we also have to remember who's in front of us and what they have access to, and really be facilitators of learning rather than, directors of learning.
Yeah, Rob, what's your take when you first started out?
Sure.
What was it different than
Oh,
what you're seeing now?
for sure. Josh, when you first threw that question out, I was thinking from a leadership capacity, or just thinking at the building level, what does that look like? And from a principal standpoint, one of the things I think of is they're asked to be instructional leaders now more than ever. You know, when I was growing up, or even when I started my teaching career, my principal did not share with me or give me much guidance on what the classroom should look like. And I believe that has changed for a lot of reasons. Accountability systems in the United States and different states have changed and whatnot. But I do think instructional leadership is something that has evolved in the last 20 years, if you will, especially in the last 10. But the other thing that I think came to mind, and Jessica mentioned a little bit with the social media, I think that both teachers and principals and the central office folks need to be storytellers to a certain extent. That is something that has really changed, is being responsive to stakeholders in the community, being responsive to your staff and to the students of what's going on, sharing good things, discussing hard topics, whether it's equity, politics, religion, everything that goes with that. The leadership has become much more challenging because our world is a smaller place, right? And information is much more accessible. And honestly, getting your message out is very important and accurate. And then also making sure and combating inaccuracies about the school and everything that goes with it. So from a leadership standpoint, I think those challenges have evolved over the last few years.
Yeah, I want to push on something you said, though. You mentioned instructional leadership.
Yep.
And that term has been around for a while now. It needs to be instructional leaders. And I know when I was superintendent and I would hire people who said they were instructional leaders, but then when they actually people define it differently. So talk a little bit. I'd like to hear both of you, describe what instructional leadership actually looks like at the school level. Like, what does it mean to be an instructional leader?
Okay. Well, I mean, I think a lot of things. First of all, I think it really came into vogue, if you will, all the way back. I'm old enough to remember No Child Left Behind, and all of a sudden we were now accountable for everybody, and there's a a whole lot of discussion about that. But I think at the building level, principals, it's not enough just to be visible. The idea of, hey, I'm just going to do a bunch of walkthroughs and walk through classrooms. Do you have the courage and the capacity to actually give feedback about what you're doing? And so what does that system look like on your campus? I think that a lot of principals I work with, they struggle to feel confident to give critical feedback, to talk to their teachers about that. And so, one of the strategies we use is really try to, how can we have an on-ramp into that conversation, whether it's through a team, a department, or a PLC or a team meeting, to talk and listen.
PLC, a professional learning community, right?
Yeah, professional learning. Yep. And so, but I really think I try to focus on, as a principal, you don't have to know everything, but let's ask good questions about instruction, and let's start there and be a learner ourselves and model that. And so I think
that key leadership skill of asking good questions, right? Are we asking the right questions? So Jessica, talk a little bit about instructional leadership. Like, what does that actually mean at the ground level?
Well, I think first and foremost, you have to have a vision of what good instruction is, right? You can't ask the right questions, or you can't give feedback if you don't have clarity yourself about what, high quality, rigorous instruction is. I think, your ability to help develop shared goals with your faculty is another really important aspect of instructional leadership. Faculty aren't going to want to follow someone who's just going to come in and tell them what to do. I think the art of leadership is really about helping them, come to the conclusions that you want them to, making them believe that it's their conclusions, by really kind of creating the supportive conditions. And you're right, it's not enough just to be present in classrooms. You have to be able to give both the warm and the cool feedback, to also create conditions for agency, right? Again, we want structured agency. That's what's really going to help facilitate learning communities. Or
what does that mean, structured agency? I don't know that I understand that term.
Yeah, so structured agency, this came out of my dissertation work. And what I found is that the most powerful and effective learning communities, leadership created structures for which teachers really had the agency to work within, meet the needs of, the teams of children that they were collaborating around. And so it's not just sort of putting teachers in learning communities, but it's really about providing the structures and support so that quality conversations are happening, so that they understand, the work. and the team dynamics, putting together really strong teams of people in very intentional and deliberate ways are important aspects of instructional leadership. So it's really, I think, a combination of the skill that the leader brings to the table, but also leadership is about enabling others and, creating conditions for people to do good work.
Yeah, so first of all, to everybody in the audience, if you have a question, put it in the chat or put it in the Q&A, please, if you have any questions or comments on anything. So I want to go back, Jessica, to something you said about having a point of view, right? Having a vision. I was speaking yesterday actually with a good friend of mine who's the CEO of one of the major urban school districts in the country, and we're talking about leadership, and I was just getting her ideas, and she was talking about you got to have a point of view, right, about what great teaching and learning looks like. But the challenge is, if you're running a big school, are you expected to know everything about how to teach chemistry and how to teach poetry and how to write and how to teach history? Like, one of the challenges here is there's only so much that a school leader or a central officer for them can know about like a specific content area. You're not expected to be an expert in all of that, yet you have to know enough to ask the right questions. And so there's like a lens that you have to look through. So you have a vision for what kids should know and be able to do. But then when you're doing the engagement of others, you sort of have to have this lens of like asking the right questions. So talk a little bit about finding the balance between like, okay, I know specifically what a great, literature lesson looks like or a chemistry lesson looks like versus the ability to sort of organize people to act on this vision. What does that look like? Either of you jump in on that. Yeah.
So I'll jump in there. I think that I think you make a great point that you can't know everything, but there are some things going all the way back to your culture question about model schools, what it takes to model school. And I think one of that is here's some non-negotiables. We're going to treat kids well. We're going to be prepared for our lessons, whatever those are. One of the strategies that I use on that, Josh, when it comes to the content type questions is let's calibrate together. And the most successful principals might bring find processes in place to bring other people along with them on classroom walks so that teachers are together. Like, I'm going to have my science department chair come with me because I don't know anything about chemistry or something like that. And I think it shows a vulnerability of the leader, but I also think it helps you as a learner, but it's helping the whole staff have those discussions. So I think it's okay to say that, be able to ask questions, but I think it really helps your campus to open that up a little bit and bring other people along to calibrate, whether it's a teacher or an assistant principal or somebody else. Take somebody in those classrooms with you and have a talk about what you saw. Yeah. And I think that's just one little strategy that I have used over time that has really helped.
So what I really try to do is, so Dick Elmore, when he introduced this idea of instructional rounds with the Connecticut Superintendent's Roundtable, Josh, I think you were part of that in the very beginning.
Yep.
I did some yesterday at a high school.
Yeah. And so, when I walk into classrooms, it's not necessarily for me about the content. I mean, that's important. And I think Rob makes a great point about bringing, content experts with you on those walkthroughs. But I'm really looking at three things. I try to keep it simple. And really, this comes out of Elmore's instructional rounds. What is the teacher saying and doing? What's the student saying and doing? And what's the task, right?
Yeah.
And those three things really come down to, at the end of the day, is the teacher talking more than the students, right? Is the task, grade level or above and rigorous? And what are the students talking about as they're working, right? Who's doing the work, right? That's a big question I ask. Who's doing the work? Are the kids doing the work? Are they carrying the
I probably said that 15 times yesterday, Jessica.
Right. Like who's doing the work when you, and that gives you sort of this bucket list of questions that you can then go back and really ask the teacher, but it keeps it sort of in those three lanes, and it's really easy and accessible for teachers then to reflect on and improve their practice.
Please, Rob.
I was going to say, if I could add to that, when we talk about that instructional core Jessica's talking about, I tell principals all the time, if you change one, the other two are going to change, right? If the engagement of the student comes up, the teacher will do better, if the content changes. And so that kind of helps that formula too. They can visualize it. It compartmentalizes into it, small wins and small improvement pockets by focusing on that instructional core. That's a very good point.
So We have a question in the Q&A that I think is great that I want to jump on. And Ahmed asks, what's the difference between instruction and teaching? Like, we sort of use those phrases interchangeably. I don't know that I have a great answer to that, so I'm going to turn it to both of you who are much smarter than I am when it comes to these things. Like, what we talk about instruction, we talk about teaching, we talk about who's doing the work, right? Like,
I think I have an answer.
okay, let's try it
and
out.
I don't know, it just sort of came to me, but that's a really, really hard question to answer. But if I think of teaching, right, I think that teaching is an art and a science, right? There's an art to teaching, and there's also technical aspects to teaching. So there's the art and the science of it. And then when I think of instruction, right, I think of sort of the things that we have to do, right, yeah, to deliver. Like, instruction is about delivery, but teaching is broader than that, right? There's the art and the science to it, right? There's the human aspect, and there's also then sort of the technical aspects of it. So that just came to me when I thought about the difference.
Yeah, I would have put teaching as the umbrella and instruction as part of that, under that, a large part of what they have to do, but not the only thing that they have to do.
I remember reading something when I was in grad school, I think it was by Michael Cohen, where he said, kids are always learning, regardless of what you're teaching. And meaning that, right, and the idea being that, like, right, sometimes you are directly instructing somebody in how to do something, right? Sometimes you're organizing a classroom where the kids are learning with each other, right? And so I think you're right, Rob. There's a sort of umbrella of teaching, and sometimes instruction should be direct, sometimes it should be more constructivist. I think one of the challenges we have is knowing when to do which one, right? When you say, no, I'm going to teach you this very specific skill that you need, versus I'm going to let you struggle with it and wrestle with an idea, and then, correct and adjust as we get going. All right, I want to shift a little. Yeah, please, Jessica. And then I want to
say, like, doesn't teaching also include, I think, I love Rob's visual about the umbrella, but the relationship, right? The connection between people, right? Because teaching really doesn't happen unless there is a connection and there's a relationship.
Yep.
Well, and
All
I
right,
think
so I want to go back
has
to
a lot of instructional strategies.
yeah, you got to have a lot of different
Yes,
strategies. As a leader, you have to sort of know what good strategies look like, and how to help people adjust and readjust, which goes back to the feedback question. I want to turn to data, something we're consuming. And Rob, you mentioned No Child Left Behind before, which for those of you who don't know, that was the federal law passed in 2001. So it's been about 23 years. First federal law that required every state to give standardized tests to students in grades 3 through 8 and grade 10. And in the US, there's 13,500 school districts, and everybody, it's locally controlled by an elected school board. So there isn't a national system in the way there is in other countries, but we do have to comply with this law. And even though it's taken different shapes and forms, kids are still tested grades 3 through 8 in literacy and mathematics, and those tests are used to determine whether a school and a school system is doing well or doing poorly, right? So data has become this real thing that everybody needs to focus on. And I remember back in the day that all we focused on was ELA, literacy, and mathematics scores. So talk a little bit, and now it's different because what you described earlier is what a model school is, right? So talk a little bit, both of you, about how leaders should be thinking about data. What does database decision-making look like? What kinds of data should people be looking at? How should they be doing that? Rob, you go first, then Jessica, to talk about data.
Well, it's funny you said that, because one of the things that comes to mind is, I think this idea of data-driven instruction or data-driven decision-making is one of those terms that gets thrown out all the time and is rarely done effectively. So, there's several things I think. First of all, I really like the work of Victoria Bernhardt, talks about multiple measures of data, and trying to say it's not just about the standardized test score, but what else is going on at your school. And so I think an underutilized process that leaders need to really probably dive in and spend more time on is a simple needs assessment. Like, are we, it goes back to what questions are we asking? When I go into a school, one of the first things I will ask is, what data is most important to you? And what data would your teacher say is most important to you? And are those the same things? And so we start talking about that, and then we throw out a question: which data actually changes instruction? Which data is collected for compliance? And I think those kind of, I call it a data audit question, but we really have to have an honest conversation about your current reality of what data is important to you and what are you using. All that being said, I think we're starting in the United States to have the tide is starting to turn into more of growth data. The NWA map is a very popular one in the United States, but there are others. But this idea, are students growing versus everybody needing to be at the same place at the same time? One of the districts I work with uses growth data as well as any that I know of to really measure their own progress and things of that nature. But
talk about how they use it. Yeah, talk about how they use it. Jessica, we're going to turn to you on that.
This particular district I'm talking about is Moline, Illinois, Moline, Valley in Illinois, and they do concentrate heavily on the map, NWA map assessment, and that assessment's given 3 times a year, and they do it grades 1 through K through 8, and they really focus in on student growth both year to year, but then also during the year, beginning, middle, and end. They celebrate it. You will see. I've been fortunate to go onto a campus with the superintendent where they go into teachers' classrooms and say, guess what? 75% of you met your growth goal, and the kids just go crazy, and they give them a little framed plaque, and they do those kind of things. But beyond just the celebration, the idea of individual goal setting with kids is very prevalent there. And so kids know where they are, and they know where they're going. They know, what skills they're working on to meet their growth. And it just becomes part of their culture and their discussion. And again, it's not focused on, I've got to be at a certain place on a certain day at a certain time, but here's where I am and here's where I'm going. And, I of all the districts and schools all over the country that I work with, seeing that example of really focusing in on individual student growth versus, again, a grade level at a time, a school at a time. But we're talking about individual kids. It's fun to see. It's fun to see when people are doing it like that.
Jessica, what are you seeing with database decision making these days? Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, I think there's good news and there's bad news, right? I'll start with the bad news. The bad news is that, many systems in the United States are still drips. And what I mean by that is they're data rich, information poor. Lots of assessments being given to kids, lots of data, but not necessarily clarity around the information that they're getting and how that's being utilized to move student performance. And so I think it's really important that you have a good assessment system. I think leadership really needs to pay attention. So, Rob's point about having an audit of your assessment system is really critical, and your leading and lagging indicators, the assessments that you choose, I think the lagging indicators really need to have a predictive nature to the leading ones, right? You want to make sure that the assessments that you're giving that are interim assessments or formative assessments, they're predictive of what it is in terms of the whole, and whether or not students are going to meet grade level standards. And choose wisely, right? I think we overassess students in many places, and we have to make better choices about what it is that we're looking for and why we're giving the assessment and what information we really want to utilize to improve student outcomes.
So I want to push on this leading
an autopsy, or is it?
What?
No, I was just going to say, is the data an autopsy? Are we just looking about what happened, or are we actually trying to?
Well, let's talk about leading and lagging indicators a little bit. And a question came up in the chat about grades as well. I am struck by how our focus, as you just said, Jessica, right, is really on the lagging indicators, right? How did the kids do on the test that they took in March or April? We don't get the results back until July, right? And while student achievement is, of course, the goal, the leading indicators are adult actions, right? Did I do something? Did the teacher do something different in order to improve student achievement? And we don't spend enough time focusing on the leading indicators, both the predictive assessments that are so important, and we should talk about grades in relation to that, but also like the adult actions, right? I'm not going to lose weight unless I stop eating, candy or eat less and exercise. It's not going to happen just by hoping and weighing myself, right? So like talk a little bit about the kind of leading indicators around adult actions that we need to be looking for that will then result in higher student achievement. Either one of you, just jump in.
Go ahead, Jessica.
Oh,
I think
well, I mean, I guess, Josh, I need more clarity around the question. So, I mean, are you talking about like what adults are doing differently, or are you talking about the systems and structures that need to be?
I want to know how leaders should be organizing to change adult action, right? Because people have to do something differently in the face of to achieve a vision or to address a problem. It's not right. And
so.
how leaders actually get people to change adult practice, in my mind, those are the leading indicators that are essential that get to the lagging indicators of the results. So does that clarify it?
I'll throw an example. I don't know if it's going to totally answer your question, but then I will also get to the grade piece. But a very specific example, was working with a group of campus leaders, and we're talking about this idea of we can do all the walkthroughs we want and get feedback, but that's after the fact. Like I'll never get that time back. And so how can we create a process or a system that actually improves the instruction before it's given? And again, I don't know if that's exactly what you're talking about, Josh, and probably not, but I do think it's important as a leader, what can we do to help our teachers before? And so, we work on this idea of a pre-lesson share. Let's make sure that this lesson is the best we can do. It's a continuous improvement model or whatever you want to call it. But, I think this idea of planning and preparing a good type of lesson beforehand, because I want to take data on this lesson, but I want to make sure it's good beforehand, because that kind of goes, that will lead me into the grades. Are the things that we're putting grades on, are they worth anything? Are they decent are they good assignments? Because I think that communicates a little bit too. That's a whole other hour on just grading, right?
Yeah. No, but I appreciate that, Rob. So what you're saying is the investment in the planning, right, pays off. The investment, right, really doing the pre-work. Yeah, Jessica, talk a little bit about that.
Well, I was just going to say that I think the most important thing that leaders need to do, and it kind of just piggybacks off of Rob's point about planning, is just really understanding the systems and structures that impact and what's the interplay of those systems and structures that actually impact this type of work, right? You need to have really, really strong information systems. How are teachers getting information? What are the structures in which they're having conversations around that information? Your assessment system, right? So your instructional infrastructure has to be really strong, right? Your curriculum, your assessment has to be very coherent. All of these things have to be working in coherence and alignment together. And unless leaders really take the time with their teams to sort of create that map for teachers, you're really kind of throwing them out to the wolves. And, this is what I say all the time. The system is designed to do exactly what it's doing because we don't necessarily do that, right? And the system is really like sending people in spinning many times, like everyone's working so hard. And if I think we had just more clarity around the systems and structures, and they were working in better alignment and coherence, we wouldn't feel that burnout that many of us are feeling in the USA.
Yeah. So let's talk a little more specifically about grades, because the question came up. I have a junior in high school, my son, and the grade inflation is just you don't give a kid a C anymore unless they really bombed it, and a B, even a bit like grades don't really seem to mean anything anymore. I don't know. What do you think the role is of grading these days?
I'm working with a district right now that's trying to transition to standards-based grading.
What does that mean, standards-based grading?
So it's more rubric-based. I've met this skill. Their report card, if you will, is not numerical anymore. It's like these are the set of skills at this particular course or grade level, and how do we do that? And here in the United States, if you've been around very long, you've probably experienced some level of that. I think I have still scars on my back from trying to do it in my own district, right?
I did
And
it
a
in
lot
your
of it had nothing.
district.
I think most educators would say this is the best way to do this.
Right.
However, you're changing a system that's been around for a couple hundred years, and parents don't understand it, and it's more time consuming. It's hard. So this idea of grade, a numerical grade versus that doesn't mean anything versus a standard based grade, and what does that look like on a rubric or scale, I think is an important conversation to still have. I think, and I think it's pretty rough. This whole idea, I was in district last week. We don't give zeros anymore, and the teachers were really struggling with this. And I've been in many districts that are like this. What does this look like, and what do the numbers even mean? Is a real struggle right now, I think. In a
I
lot
was
of places.
talking to some couple university professors the other day, said that if they give a low grade, they then have to contend with kids and parents
Mhm.
arguing it and claiming mental health issues, or right, that there's a risk to giving a low grade, and many of them
Right.
now take the path of least
Well,
resistance. Like, you know what, forget about it. I'm just going to give them a better grade.
My own children who are in college now went through a system where if they got below a 70, they had automatically by grading policy had the right to redo it.
Yeah.
And
What's your take on grades? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think our grading system, the old grading system is broken. I mean, kids are grade inflation is rampant everywhere, and I don't think it necessarily reflects what kids know and are able to do. I do like the idea of a standards-based grading system, but and here's the big but. It takes a lot of training and a lot of work to bring people to a shared understanding of what it means to demonstrate competency in a standard. And so I think, creating the space and giving them the time to be able to create clarity and build collective commitment around what it means to demonstrate proficiency. And I'm a big believer of this too. You learn the work by doing the work. Teachers need professional development where they are actually put in the seat of a kid, and they have to wrestle with whatever it is that they're asking kids to do to understand the process by which you're leading students to that outcome. And we don't do a lot of professional development like that. A lot of teachers get the type of teaching that they're giving, sit and get, right?
Yeah.
Rather than really getting their hands dirty and pulling apart standards, really digging into curriculum so that they have a strong understanding of what it is that kids should be demonstrating to them.
So I want to actually take this conversation about grades sort of back to the beginning, because when I hear both of you talk about sort of the purpose of grades, looking at data, I'm thinking about what you both started with around feedback and culture, and the idea that you have to have a clear vision for what great teaching and learning looks like, and for what kids should know and be able to do, and what adults need to be able to do, what needs to do in service of that. And then you also have to be able to have this regular review of different kinds of data to understand that we're making progress towards it. And then you have to be able to do something in the face of that, whether it's a conversation with a child, and you talked about that earlier, Rob, and that in my old school, kids feel safe, right? You can say, hey, you know what? You need to work on this area. This is not so great. Or you're recognizing great performance.
Sure.
And you also have to have adults talking to each other about, this lesson didn't quite hit, right? That is complex work. And in my mind, that comes down to culture, right? How do people interact with each other in service of the vision? And as I hear you talking, as I've come to learn and realize and wish I knew earlier in my career, culture is the thing in lots, like that's what binds us all together. So both of you talk a little bit about what does it mean to, because the other thing that was coming up earlier, none of what you were describing before, the technical skills that leaders have to do, right? You're talking about how they manage people and lead people. So talk about what leaders need to do to drive culture. And Jessica, why don't you start with that, and then Rob will turn it over to you. And if you have examples of districts or schools you're working with, I'd like to talk about what leaders need to do to drive a positive, sustaining improvement culture.
Yeah, I think, you hit the nail on the head, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. We all know that phrase, that term. It's 100% true. I think Rob nailed it in the beginning when he talked about the importance of trust. Relational trust is the cornerstone of culture work. And so what we're really trying to do with aspiring principals, I'm running an Aspiring Principals Academy now. And our first session was all around vulnerability-based trust. Like, how do you build that?
I
And
mean,
it
the
really,
leader has to be vulnerable.
yeah, the leader has to be vulnerable, right? How do you create authenticity in terms of who you are and really create connection with the people that you're leading? Because if you don't do that, you're going to look over your shoulder and you're going to see that no one's following you.
Yeah, but I'm the expert. I'm in this job because
That's the
I'm
thing.
told I'm the smart, right? So
That's-
like, I don't want to
that's the
say, oh
thing.
my gosh, I don't know. I
That's
mean,
the thing, that mindset of I'm the expert is just like the teacher has the mindset. If the teacher has the mindset of I'm the holder of all knowledge, it's so antiquated in terms of, how do you build strong classroom culture? How do you build strong school culture?
so give me an example of how you teach someone how to like be vulnerable.
How do you teach someone? So one of the things that we did, and I did this with state agency leaders just the day before yesterday, and I did it with the Aspiring Principals Academy the day before. It's really exploring their own why. Talked about the importance of stories and storytelling, but I think that begins with really helping them explore their own values and how they came, their experiences, how they came to those values and beliefs, and really helping them to become comfortable with being uncomfortable, with sharing, some of those experiences with others, because that's how we connect, right? My son is in the Army, and he's leading a platoon of right now. And one thing I had to explain to him was, honey, it's great if you have a strategy and you have a logical argument for something, but that is not going to get people to follow you or to give you what it is you're looking for, because the decisions that we make are made in the limbic part of the brain. And that's the affective part, the emotions, the feelings, the heart. The heart is where people make decisions, and they'll decide to follow you whether or not you hit that limbic part of the brain or you hit their heart, more than if you give them a logical argument as to why they should do what it is that
So just because they have the stripes on your arm or the ribbons on each, it doesn't matter. You got to appeal to their
absolutely.
emotions, and that happens through stories.
It's the effective, yes, it's the effective part. That's how you build culture.
Yeah, Rob, talk a little bit about culture and
oh man, I could have gone forever on that. I was just kind of writing notes. A couple of things, Josh, when you first started this idea of how do we bring that all together, that high expectation piece, I think that one of them, I just have to say this about the culture, that brings the equity. Okay. And I use the example all the time. Is it okay to have a strong teacher and across the hall a weak teacher? Are you okay with that as a principal? And if you, because that's an inequitable situation you've created for kids. So
talk about what does equity mean exactly? Define the term.
Oh gosh, it can mean a lot of different things. But for me, I don't automatically go to things that maybe the general public thinks about as far as like skin color or socioeconomic status. I think there's a lot of cultural things that have to be brought into that are part of equity. But when I'm talking about it from an instructional leadership standpoint, my idea is that everybody gets has the opportunity for a high level, a high expectation of instruction and learning outcomes for themselves and kids, and that's going to be different for every kid. But our standard needs to be pretty high, or high for everybody, and it can't just be high for some kids. And so then I go back to that example. If I have a veteran master teacher that's been doing it for 12 years, and then across the hall I have a brand new teacher, likely those are different experiences for the kids. So what can I do to bring that gap closer? That's why teachers have to be working together and trust, because that they only get to do 5th grade once, is what I say, a lot of times. And so from an equity standpoint, and there's a lot of research out there, whether you go back to Marzano or Elmore, both said, the biggest disparity in our classrooms, our achievement gap, is teacher to teacher. It's not school to school. And so making sure you have that. And one of the questions I ask principals all the time when I'm working, is it a choice to be great at your school? Mm-hmm. Because as soon as it's a choice to be great, whether it's a student or a teacher, then that means I don't have to be. And so what is the culture and standard that we set for our teachers and our kids? And that would go right back to the works and grading and everything else that goes with it. Is it a choice to be great at your school? To further answer the question, though, I really go into 5 things that a principal has to have for that culture. And you got to be an instructional leader, you got to be a servant leader. Those are 2 different things, but you got to have both the people side of it and the content knowledge side of it, and do activities like that. I have down my 3rd one is storyteller, and not just your story, but your school story. You're responsible for telling your school story. And so you have to do that. And I think you have to model and be a learner is the 4th thing. And really, are you learning and doing? And the 5th one is reflect and celebrate. I think good leaders have to do that. You have to have the courage to reflect on how things are going and be willing to change it if it's not going the way it needs to be. And I think your staff needs to see that.
Yeah, I always used to say, and I still say you can't change culture by memo. It's just like you don't reduce bullying by having an assembly about why you should bully. It's about the day-to-day interactions that people have with each other that really create the culture that you want, and the leader's ability to see it and understand it and modify and correct it. The small things. It's culture is a lot about the small things that happen every day. How are kids greeted when they walk into the school? How are families greeted when they walk in the schools? How are teachers recognized and celebrated? How is bad behavior corrected, right? All those kinds of little things lead up to culture. So
can I jump on that real quick, Josh?
please, yeah.
Because that's a great example that I use a lot of times when I'm working with schools. Is I don't know a school that in August doesn't say, "Hey, I want every teacher by the door greeting kids when they come in the classroom," right? And then 3 weeks into school, is everybody doing it?
Right.
And as a leader, what do you do about that next step, right? We said we were going to do this, but we don't. So sometimes being a leader is being courageous, because we all know what to do, but do we all do it?
Yeah, when I was superintendent, I used to love visiting high schools during transition periods when kids were in the halls to see just that, Rob. But the other thing was I always wanted to see how adults talk to kids when they were wearing hats, because the struggle over hat wearing in American schools is so dumb. I mean, I'm a big believer. I'm old school. I do not think men should wear hats inside. But the fight over hats and the way when you see a principal or a kid like yell at a kid down the hall, "Hey, Rob, take off that hat," versus walking up next to them and saying, "Hey, Rob, you know what? Maybe you want to put," that tells you about the culture, right? And you can see that in 30 seconds when you're in a high school hallway during transition. Okay, we're wrapping up. Any other questions in there? There's something about university. Okay, great question. This is Dave just asked actually the question that I was going to ask. So universities are responsible for providing, education to leaders and to teachers, right? And they get a master's degree or they get a doctorate or whatever else, and then they go into the school. And you both know, as I do as well, it's not enough. It's necessary. It's not sufficient. But what should universities be doing differently to prepare leaders for the new age of education? Jessica, why don't we start with you?
So I think that universities need to really start developing better problem solvers, really helping leaders understand the difference between technical and adaptive challenges, how to unpack them, especially when you've got really complex problems. And those
What does that mean, technical versus adaptive?
Right. So technical problems are ones that it's really clear what the problem is and there's a clear solution. And adaptive problems are ones where, it's not really clear in terms of what the problem is and, what the solution is. And many times what we're seeing, especially now post-pandemic, is that many of these are now bundled, right? They're both technical and adaptive, and they're much more complex. So it's not really clear on either end. And where you really need to move into is how to engage people from a user-centered approach to really look at solutions to those particular problems. So that's definitely something important. How to build high-performing teams. That is not something that I was taught when I was in school. But if you can't build a high-functioning team and you understand the processes and ways to go about doing that, it's going to be very, very difficult. To be a strong communicator, to be able to give have difficult conversations and give feedback. And I think Rob said it a couple times today. If you don't tell your story, someone else will tell it for you. And so you have to be able to be a strong communicator and build collective commitment across the faculty. Collective commitment is a big challenge for young leaders today. And it's really a critical one, because if you can't bring people together to collectively commit to something, you're going to have exactly what Rob said. 3 weeks into school, teachers are going to stop being visible in the hallways, right? Because there wasn't collective commitment to it. So those are really important things that need to be done.
Thank you, Jessica. So Rob, what do you think? What one or two things should universities be doing more of, or less of for that matter, in their preparation of leaders today?
You know, I would just coin the term scholars of practice, give them ideas and to practice. I think, you know, a couple of weaknesses that I see in the American university system coming out for young leaders is they don't have a lot of opportunities to facilitate learning, professional learning. And you know, and all of a sudden you get this job and you're in front of 100 people and you have not experienced that as much as you like. It's different than teaching 25 kids in your class. I have 100 adults that may or may not want to listen to me. And so I think the facilitating learning, kind of like Jessica said, building a team and doing those things. But, you know, I want somebody that can stand up in front of a group and speak. And so that, I think that's a big piece there. And then again, I would just continue to practice communication, written, verbal, written, you know, and listening skills. All of those have to be part of the process to go through that. The knowledge base is there. I mean, we know what it takes to make a good school.
It's the skills.
It's how do we do it? How do we apply that knowledge?
All right, so I am going to wrap us up a couple minutes early because Jessica is in high demand and is going on another webinar right now. So I just want to thank you both for joining me in this really powerful conversation. I think there's a lot of great ideas you've put out there around leaders need to focus not just on the technical, but also on the adaptive and be leaders of people as much as they are experts in knowing what a good school looks like. For those of you who joined us, thank you. Please, I think David put the link to our Model Schools Conference in there. Please join us in the at our conference in DC in June. We love having international folks there, so please do. And I'll turn it back over to Sabina and Aisha to take us home. So thank you all.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. By the way, there is a question to you. How can the Center for the Model School support universities in developing school leaders? Is there any opportunity to partner with the center?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, you know, what we're seeing in some of the more forward-thinking school districts out there is that they are really leaning into deeper partnerships with their local universities. And so I would love to have conversation about how we can sort of take what we know and sort of what Rob and Jessica just described about leadership practice, effective leadership practice in schools, and then look at how university folks are prepared to do that. So that's a conversation we would love to have because it really helps marry those two incredibly important systems that sometimes sit in silos. So yeah, we would love to do that work.
Yeah, so I would love to extend my heartfelt thanks to each of you for joining us today for our webinar. We had the privilege of hearing from Dr. Starr, Dr. Huizenga, and Dr. Thornell, whose insights on the improving the data literacy and promoting excellence for all students and the coaching educators were incredibly valuable. These topics are critical for driving meaningful change in our educational system. So the question and contributions from the participants also, I think that will enrich our discussions and enhance our collective learning experience. Again, thank you all for taking the time to engage in this important conversation. I look forward to our future events together. If all of you want to add something or to say goodbye also, Ms. Aisha, Dr. Robert, Josh, please.
Thank you to our panelists and thank you to all the attendees. The panelists have kindly put their emails in the chat box. So if you want to reach out to them, I suppose they can contact you, right?
Yes, absolutely. Please do.
Sure.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you so much.
Great to be with you
Yeah, thank you very
today.
much for having us.
Take care.